Birth and early life in Virginia, 1751 to 1762. James Madison Jr. was born on March 16, 1751, in Port Conway, Virginia, into a prominent plantation-owning family. He was the first of 12 children born to James Madison Sr. and Nellie Conway Madison. Shortly after his birth, the family moved to Montpelier, their tobacco plantation located in Orange County, Virginia, a place that would become central to Madison's identity and legacy. From a young age, Madison was a delicate child. He suffered from recurring health problems, including seizures and what doctors described at the time as bilious fevers. These fragile conditions led him to develop an introspective personality, spending much of his early years reading and reflecting in solitude rather than engaging in physical activity. Growing up in colonial Virginia, Madison was surrounded by the social realities of plantation life, including slavery. His father owned more than 100 enslaved individuals, and Madison, though quiet and morally reflective, would be shaped and haunted by this contradiction throughout his life. Even at an early age, he showed signs of deep intellectual capacity and moral contemplation. A Brilliant Mind Education and Awakening, 1762 to 1771. Madison's formal education began at home under private tutors. He quickly outpaced the typical curriculum for boys his age. By the time he was a teenager, Madison had mastered Latin, Greek, French, mathematics, and natural philosophy. He eventually studied under Donald Robertson, a Scottish schoolmaster renowned for classical education, who instilled in Madison a deep love for literature and reason. In 1769, at the age of 18, Madison entered the College of New Jersey, now Princeton University, an institution known for its progressive and independent spirit. Rather than attending the more conservative College of William and Mary, Madison sought the intellectually vibrant atmosphere of Princeton, where he immersed himself in Enlightenment philosophy, political theory, and history. He completed a rigorous 4-year course in just 2 years, a testament to his brilliance and dedication. Madison studied the works of John Locke, Montesquieu, and other Enlightenment thinkers who would later inform his ideas about government and liberty. However, his relentless studying affected his health, and he experienced mental and physical exhaustion that would plague him periodically. After graduation, Madison returned to Montpelier, unsure of what career path to follow. The clergy and law were both options, but what ultimately drew him was public service, the call to defend liberty and justice during a time when colonial unrest was rapidly growing. The revolutionary spirit and entry into politics, 1772 to 1780. As tensions between the American colonies and Great Britain intensified, Madison began to engage more deeply with politics. In 1774, he joined the local Committee of Safety, a shadow government opposing British rule. A quiet yet determined voice, Madison quickly earned respect for his intellect and unwavering belief in liberty. In 1776, the very year of American independence, Madison was elected to the Virginia Convention, where he worked alongside Thomas Jefferson to draft the Virginia Declaration of Rights and the Virginia Constitution. Though new to politics, Madison's strong positions on religious freedom and separation of church and state were quickly evident. He argued that religious liberty was a natural right, not a gift from government. This belief would later influence the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. However, Madison's political career did not begin without obstacles. He was shy, soft-spoken, and not a natural orator, characteristics that made him less prominent in assemblies dominated by booming voices. Still, his written words carried power, and his commitment to principle was unshakable. From 1780 to 1783, Madison served in the Continental Congress, where he witnessed firsthand the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, a system that left the federal government powerless and fractured. These years would convince him that a stronger national government was essential for the survival of the Republic. Father of the Constitution, the Philadelphia Convention, 1787. By 1787, Madison had spent years preparing for what would become his greatest political challenge and most enduring legacy, the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. The nation was struggling under the Articles of Confederation, and a new framework of government was urgently needed. Madison arrived at the convention with a bold and detailed plan, the Virginia Plan. It proposed a strong central government with three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial, and a system of checks and balances. He believed that only such a structure could preserve the Union and protect individual liberty. Although the final constitution was the result of many compromises, Madison's ideas formed its core. He kept detailed notes of the proceedings, providing the most comprehensive historical record of the convention. His meticulous documentation earned him the title of Father of the Constitution. Later, to help ensure the Constitution's ratification, Madison co-authored the Federalist Papers with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay. His essays, especially Federalist No. 10, laid out powerful arguments for a republic that could balance the will of the majority with the protection of minority rights, a revolutionary idea at the time. Despite opposition, Madison's intellectual firepower and persuasive writings helped secure the Constitution's adoption. He emerged not just as a legislator, but as a political philosopher whose work would shape democracy for centuries. The Federalist Papers and Vision for America, 1787 to 1788. As the newly proposed U.S. Constitution stirred debate across the 13 states, Madison took up the pen to defend it. He joined forces with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay to write a series of essays under the pseudonym Publius. These essays, later compiled as the Federalist Papers, became foundational texts in American political philosophy. Madison's most famous contribution, Federalist No. 10, addressed the dangers of factions, groups that could dominate politics and undermine the rights of others. He argued that a large republic with a diversity of opinions and interests would be the best defense against tyranny. In Federalist No. 51, he explained the necessity of checks and balances in government. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. Through these essays, Madison revealed his vision for a balanced government, one that would preserve liberty without descending into chaos. His logic, clarity, and calm reasoning helped sway public opinion in favor of ratification, especially in key battleground states like New York and Virginia. In 1788, the Constitution was ratified, marking a triumph for Madison and his allies. Yet Madison knew the Constitution was only a framework. It would now need wise leadership and moral courage to uphold. Secretary of State under Jefferson, 1801 to 1809. After serving in the newly formed U.S. House of Representatives and helping pass the Bill of Rights, Madison took a brief retreat from national politics. But in 1801, when Thomas Jefferson became the third president of the United States, he called upon his old friend and collaborator to serve as Secretary of State. For 8 critical years, Madison managed America's foreign policy during a time of global instability. The Napoleonic Wars were raging in Europe, and both Great Britain and France regularly violated American neutrality, seizing ships and impressing American sailors into service. Madison favored diplomacy over war, but his efforts to negotiate peace with both sides often met with frustration. One of the most important acts of this period was the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, negotiated primarily by Jefferson but supported by Madison. This massive land deal doubled the size of the United States and opened the door for westward expansion. However, Madison's greatest challenge as Secretary of State was dealing with British aggression. Despite multiple attempts at trade embargoes and peaceful protest, tensions with Britain continued to rise, setting the stage for future conflict. Presidency, first term, 1809 to 1813. In 1809, Madison succeeded Jefferson and became the 4th President of the United States. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 100 pounds, Madison was the smallest president in American history, but his intellect towered over most of his peers. His first term was dominated by foreign affairs, particularly the escalating conflict with Britain. American merchants were suffering due to blockades, and British impressment of U.S. sailors continued. Madison tried to maintain a policy of non-intervention, enacting the Non-Intercourse Act and Macon's Bill No. 2, which sought to reward whichever European power respected American neutrality. Domestically, Madison's presidency faced bitter opposition from Federalists, especially in New England. Many viewed his leadership as too cautious or indecisive. However, Madison's calm demeanor, his reliance on law and principle, and his deep belief in constitutional government kept the republic steady during a time of intense pressure. Eventually, diplomacy failed. War hawks in Congress, including young leaders like Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, pushed for open conflict. Madison, who had long preferred peace, reluctantly agreed. On June 18, 1812, Madison signed the declaration of war against Britain, launching what would become known as the War of 1812. The War of 1812 Trials and Triumphs, 1812 to 1815. The War of 1812 became the defining event of Madison's presidency. It was unpopular in many parts of the country, especially in the North, where trade with Britain was vital. Madison's administration struggled to fund the war, raise troops, and protect American territory. British forces invaded Washington, D.C. in 1814 and burned the Capitol, the White House, and other federal buildings. A moment of national humiliation. Madison and his wife Dolly Madison were forced to flee, but not before Dolly famously rescued a portrait of George Washington from the burning executive mansion. Despite the setbacks, American forces achieved symbolic victories. In the Battle of Lake Erie, Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry declared, "We have met the enemy and they are ours." At Fort McHenry, the sight of the American flag still flying after a night of bombardment inspired Francis Scott Key to write The Star-Spangled Banner. The war ended with the Treaty of Ghent in December 1814, which restored the status quo and resolved little on paper, but in spirit it was considered a psychological victory for America. The Battle of New Orleans, fought after the treaty had been signed, saw General Andrew Jackson crush the British, fueling a wave of national pride. The war gave Americans a renewed sense of identity, unity, and legitimacy as an independent nation. Madison, once seen as timid, was now viewed as a steady leader who had navigated the nation through its second war with Britain. Second term and post-war achievements, 1813 to 1817. Following the War of 1812, Madison began his second term in an atmosphere of renewal. Though the war had exposed weaknesses in the young nation, particularly in its military and financial systems, it also united Americans around a common identity. This era became known as the Era of Good Feelings, characterized by a sense of national purpose and political unity. Madison recognized the need to strengthen the country's institutions. During his second term, he supported the establishment of the Second Bank of the United States in 1816, despite his earlier opposition to such federal power. He also approved a protective tariff to support American industries, a shift from his earlier views on free trade. These decisions reflected a pragmatic leader willing to adapt his ideals to the changing needs of the nation. He also advocated for internal improvements, roads, canals, and infrastructure, but remained cautious about their constitutional justification. Madison insisted that such federal projects required a constitutional amendment, showcasing his lifelong commitment to limiting centralized power, even as he wielded it. By the end of his presidency in 1817, Madison had helped heal a war-weary country and laid the groundwork for economic growth. He left office with the respect of his countrymen and the affection of allies who had stood with him through revolution, war, and nation-building. Retirement and later years at Montpelier, 1817 to 1836. After leaving public life, Madison retired to his beloved Montpelier plantation in Virginia, where he lived quietly for nearly 2 decades. Unlike many politicians, he remained intellectually active, writing, advising, and corresponding with other statesmen about the nature of the Constitution and the threats facing the Republic. Madison also served as rector of the University of Virginia, the institution founded by Thomas Jefferson. He was deeply involved in its governance and curriculum, seeking to pass Enlightenment values to future generations. Yet retirement was not without challenges. Madison faced serious financial troubles late in life, largely due to mismanagement of his plantation and the falling price of tobacco. He was also morally burdened by the continued institution of slavery, which he recognized as a contradiction to the values he had helped enshrine in the Constitution. Still, like many of his contemporaries, he did not free his slaves, a choice that continues to spark deep reflection and criticism. Despite these contradictions, Madison remained committed to the ideals of liberty, republicanism, and constitutional government. Until his final days, He guarded the legacy of the Constitution and hoped that future generations would defend it with the same passion with which it had been created. On June 28, 1836, James Madison died peacefully at the age of 85. His last words reportedly were, "Nothing more than a change of mind, my dear." Dolly Madison, the beloved First Lady. No portrait of James Madison is complete without honoring Dolly Payne Todd Madison, his devoted wife and one of the most celebrated First Ladies in American history. They married in 1794, when Madison was 43 and Dolly was a 26-year-old widow with one surviving child. Dolly brought charm, elegance, and sociability to Madison's reserved and scholarly nature. During his presidency, she transformed the White House into a center of social life and national unity, famously hosting weekly Wednesday drawing rooms, where politicians from opposing parties could gather amicably. Her courage during the British attack on Washington in 1814 became legendary. As enemy troops approached the White House, Dolly refused to leave without saving George Washington's portrait, a symbol of American dignity. Her actions became an enduring image of patriotism and grace under fire. After Madison's death, Dolly fell into poverty and sold many of his papers to the government to survive. She died in 1849, beloved and admired by all who knew her. Today, she is remembered as the First Lady in the modern sense, a public figure of influence and national importance. Legacy, the philosopher-statesman. James Madison's legacy is vast and deeply woven into the fabric of American democracy. He was father of the Constitution, whose ideas shaped the structure and spirit of American government. Co-author of the Federalist Papers, still studied in political science today. Principal architect of the Bill of Rights safeguarding individual liberties. A wartime president who, though reluctant, guided the nation through peril. A deeply reflective thinker who wrestled with the paradox of slavery in a land of freedom. Though not a man of fiery speeches or battlefield heroism, Madison's power lay in his mind, in his capacity to reason, write, and compromise. He built governments not from force but from ideas. His commitment to republicanism, pluralism, and constitutionalism helped ensure the endurance of the American experiment. And though he had flaws, especially in his failure to confront slavery more directly, his contribution to freedom and governance remains monumental. The mind behind the Constitution. James Madison lived at a time of revolution, upheaval, and transformation, and he met the moment not with a sword, but with a pen. He helped conceive the world's first large-scale constitutional democracy. He believed that liberty must be defended not just on the battlefield but in law, structure, and principle. He knew that the true test of freedom was whether it could survive disagreement, diversity, and change. Today, when Americans debate the meaning of rights, the role of government, or the limits of power, they still walk the roads Madison paved more than 2 centuries ago. He was small in stature, but giant in thought. And through the Constitution, James Madison still speaks to America and to the world.